Please give him a warm applause. Ash Maurya.
Thank you all. Thank you. Welcome. So let me go ahead and kick things off by setting some context. This is a great time for product management. As you all know, you're all living, breathing proof of this. I wanted to start by talking about why we are here and what got us here. So on the one hand, if we look at things on the bright side, we are living at a very interesting time for product. Product development has never been cheaper or easier to build, products in general. Now, I don't want to make this sound like product development is easy, but it has become a lot easier than it was, say, a decade ago. And this is thanks to access to information. We are sharing things a lot more openly. And you see this reflected both in the startup world, especially in the product management world, where we are building lots and lots of products today than any other time in history. Now, this does come with a set of challenges. So while we're building a lot of products, on the flip side, we have, for every category that is out there, we have a lot more products chasing the same finite number of customers. Sure, markets grow, but there are more products chasing customers than the other way around. And so today, from a customer perspective, they have a lot more choices, which sounds good, but this reduces the barriers to switching. So as we'll see, this reflects in some new challenges that I'll talk about today. In response to this, many companies today have to embrace speed, and more specifically, speed of learning. Those companies that can outlearn their competition stand to build their first release and get the attention of the market. But again, if they fall asleep on the wheel, they pretty much lose that advantage. So this is very much of a continuous process. We don't have to learn just once, but continuously. Now, when we look at speed, part of speed is reducing the crunch time or the cycle time. What I'm showing here is your traditional product development lifecycle. And the first aspect of speed is reducing this. We see this reflected in shorter cycle times already. Some of us who have lived through some of these waves, from waterfall through agile and then lean, know what I'm talking about. So while the stages themselves haven't changed all that much, what we are doing within the stages have changed. But the first thing I want to highlight here is there is a compression of cycle time. But this is only part of the answer. We can go fast, but simply going fast and throwing solutions at customers, this may be labeled as a minimum viable product, what I show here as an MVP, or an MVF, the minimum viable feature, or an MVR, which is your minimum viable release, a collection of features. Simply packaging these up, calling it an experiment, and throwing it at customers in the hopes that we can learn from them and refine used to work, but because of what I just said, customers today have a lot more choices than ever before. And so when they encounter a half-baked product, and again, most initial releases tend to have some issues. And so they are, as much as we like to make them as good as possible, they're going to have issues. But when we simply throw a half-baked product at customers, they don't turn into beta testers or give us lots of feedback unless they already know you, like you, and trust you. They simply turn around and find the next product that is going to solve their needs. So this is the challenge that we are facing today. Now, when this happens, something else ensues, which is we try to, of course, fix this problem, but without feedback, the build trap starts. This is where we start throwing feature after feature in chase of that mythical killer feature. Or if you're on the marketing side, we start doing better copywriting or better design. On the design side, start playing around with price. There are too many things to test. And at some point, we kind of go around this hamster wheel where we are endlessly running experiments in the hopes that we will find something that works. And don't get me wrong, there are, of course, through brute force, many companies who do find insightful accidental discoveries, but you can probably agree with me that it is not a systematic way of finding what's going to work. And so if we flip our attention to the second challenge, so reducing crunch time or cycle time is the first part, but the more important thing I find is focusing our attention on where the learning happens. So if I go back to this picture, we can see that at the earlier stages of a product or a feature, we are gathering requirements. This is where we are learning about customers and doing some of the learning. When we start building product, we address a lot of the technical risks in the product. And the real learning, in my opinion, really starts when we get the product in the hand of customers. This is where we start testing adoption, engagement, market risk. And so that's where most of the real learning happens. And so the problem with this picture is that when we look at this, most of the time is spent in the middle here. We're spending a lot of time on the technical risk sides, when the reality today is that the riskier components are really on these outer edges, customer risks and market risks. And so if we are to build a better process for finding what customers want, we have to start front loading some of the market risk testing. And so we have to do what we normally would save until we release the product out, to do some of that much, much earlier today. And this requires a different approach. This requires a way of not only shrinking cycle time, but starting to do things in a more blended fashion, where the stages blend into each other. So I call this continuous innovation. This happens, many people just call this continuous. But the idea here is that there is a cycle of continuous discovery, where we are constantly learning what our customers need and want. And then there's constant or continuous validation that happens, and you can kind of see how this loops into each other. So what I want to do today is preview some of the techniques for how you might put something like this into practice. Now, I like to think in terms of models. And so what I'm going to share with you is a mental model that has served me very well. At the outset, Thomas mentioned jobs to be done. That has been a very big influence in my work lately. And so you will see a lot of those principles coupled with many other techniques from systems design, systems thinking, and that's what we will kind of walk through here in the next set of slides. So the mental model I want to share with you helps answer this question. As product people, we are all charged with building better products, but the key question is asking, what does better really even mean in the first place? For a lot of us, entrepreneurs, founders, product managers, when we look at our product, this is how we tend to answer the question. We have a product in our head. Sure, we look at some problems, but really what tends to happen is we look at our solution, and very quickly that becomes the center of the universe. If you're familiar with the lean canvas, unconsciously this begins to happen. We have already committed to building a hammer, and everything starts looking like a nail. And this is just a cognitive bias, and it happens to everyone. So you have to just admit that this happens to us because we fall in love with our product. Now, that is not necessarily by itself a problem, because we are passionate about the solutions and the products we build. But what I want to share with you today is a way of sidestepping this bias and still making sure that we are building products that are really going to succeed. So building products that customers will ultimately want. And so over the years, I kind of started building this mental model, something I call the innovator's gift. Hopefully the gift part will be pretty clear, because when you apply this kind of thinking, product development becomes just a little bit easier. So let's kind of walk through this. The first premise here is that when we are trying to build something innovative, we have to focus on innovative solutions, but the problems don't need to be innovative. In fact, we don't want the problems to be innovative, because otherwise our customers don't know they have the problem. So this first principle here is new problems come from old solutions. And there's a subtext here that I want you to challenge. It's very easy to gloss over this idea that there's always an old way, especially when I work with startups. They feel like they are building something that has no competition. But time and again, we can find there's always an old way of doing things, and a new way comes and does it better. And so this is something we can maybe do some discussion in the Q&A if there is anyone that can think of a product that you have seen that had no competition or no old way. So this is one of those universal principles, but I want you to sit on this, think about it, and really challenge this, because you have to understand this or internalize this before you can apply any of the rest of what we'll talk about here today. Next, I'll share with you the story of innovation. So this is our customer. This could be you, for all that matters. We go about our days seemingly in this Zen state where nothing is happening, and then different things start to influence us. We start to get these triggers or situational changes, and I'm showing a simple example here of a job trigger of when you might be tired at night. This is where a job to be done, an unmet need or want materializes, and we have this job that starts to pop in our head. I want to go to sleep, and there's a desired outcome that drives us or motivates us for this job, and that you see at the top of this hill. I want to sleep so I can be rested and recharged for the next day. Now, when this story materializes, we are habits of creature, and so we don't go looking for products. Most of us will just hire our bed that's in your bedroom for the next 8 hours. Now, I promised a story. This is not a very interesting story. As in any story, we have to understand the context, and that's what the story is. So this is the backstory or the exposition, if you're familiar with story structure. Then something interesting is going to happen. In any story, there's going to be an inciting action where something changes. And so this is where the second principle comes in. Innovation is fundamentally about causing a switch from an old way to a new way. And this is where in our story, we are going to see a triggering event, but something special happens here where we get a triggering event with an expectation violation. It's a fancy way of saying that it causes us to consider moving in a different direction. So here I'm showing a situation where I've got that same job to be done, but this time around I'm traveling, and so I can't teleport back to my bedroom and sleep in the same bed. So already something has changed. And then there's a second condition here where hotels are also sold out. And so this is where we start to see this person struggling and the old way breaks. So in the story, this is that inciting action where now our customer has to do something to get the job done. So this is where you start to see them moving up this hill and start considering some different options. So the old way breaks, and this is the selection of the new way stage. Now the job must go on. We obviously need to get our sleep and rest. And so some solution is going to get picked. As a product manager, the key question is asking, how can that be your product, right? So this is how I think of products. When we are building a product, there is going to be a job to be done. There is going to be a consideration set, and we want to be hired for the job at this top of the hill. The best way of doing this, I have found, is by understanding the old way and by positioning your product in such a way that it agitates or breaks the old way in your customer's mind. Now, this may be a new feature you're building. This could be a release. This could be a minimum viable product. This equally applies in all those situations. And so let's talk about how we apply these principles. So these are the 3 tenets in this mental model. In the next few slides, I'll talk about some ways of taking these principles and putting them to practice. So if you take the first concept, there is always an old way. The insight we can glean from here is that the best way of actually figuring out what this new way is going to be is by understanding what the old ways are. So you can discover new problems worth solving by studying how customers use old solutions. And this is product discovery. This is problem discovery. There's no pitching here. We are not talking about solution yet. We're just getting outside the building and using some techniques for discovery. So the mindset to internalize here is one of discovery before validation, which is just knowingly quite hard for us founders and entrepreneurs and product managers because we almost always want to talk about solution. So what we need to do is train ourselves to internalize discovery before validation. What's different here is that instead of asking the first question, which is what problems can I solve with my solution, we ask the second question, which is what are these existing alternatives that people are using and what's broken in the old way? And so this is that mindset shift from the innovator's bias to the innovator's gift. I have found that the best and fastest way, ironically, is talking to customers. And we have to use carefully unscripted scripts because we don't know what we don't know. And so we're really going out here to discover and uncover the story of innovation, the current story, the status quo story. And so in this first story, what we are really trying to answer for ourselves is understand what is causing people to hire this existing alternative. So what existing alternative or chosen solution in the first place are they picking when they have this situation arise? And what are they currently hiring and why? Now, there's a whole set of techniques that you can use, which I'm not going to get into today, but I'm sure if you go looking for jobs to be done interviews and techniques, problem discovery interviews, you will find some of these. But what we are really trying to find is summarize these stories and extract a few key insights. So I'm going to highlight those. I touched on these already in the innovation story early on, but I like to think of the story in 3 acts. So the first act is the breaking of the old way. And the key insights we want to glean here is job-based segmentation. So we want to understand who these people are that we are building things for, what situations arise, how do we identify them, how do we figure out who our ideal early adopters are going to be for this feature or for this product. And so that's what the first act is about, is understanding the situation people find themselves that make them go up this hill. In the second act, we actually study in these interviews, what is their consideration set? So what products do they consider? And then what's their firing criteria? So what I mean here is that they're going to consider a set of products, but not pick them. And I want to know, why don't they pick them? Because we can learn a lot from what people don't do, especially in the case when they're not picking products. So consideration set and firing criteria is what we are aiming for in the second part of the story. And then finally, we want to understand which solution does get picked and what was that chosen solution. Did the chosen solution meet their ideal criteria? So what trade-offs did they have when they were picking the solution? And then understand the gap between where they were and where they are now. So what is their desired outcome when they start? What is the actual outcome when they end? And that creates a outcome gap that maybe we can fit, or we can come in and build something better. So this is how we do these interviews and the kind of insights we are trying to glean. Typically, you will have to run a few of these interviews. It's not just 1 interview or 2 interviews. You might have to run a dozen or 2 dozen interviews. But the good news is that it's not hundreds of interviews. After about 10 to 20 interviews, patterns start emerging. And this is where we can now shift into the second part of the application, where we take these insights and we now start to design, redesign, or if you already have a product, position that product to cause a switch. So remember, innovation is fundamentally about causing a switch. Now, when we get into the solution design phase, solution design is all about balancing trade-offs. And so I'm going to share some of these trade-offs, and we'll walk through some other mental models. Some of you may already be familiar with these. One of the challenges with packaging any release is figuring out what features are going to go into that release. And so I'm a big fan of the Kano model, which came from the manufacturing world. Cars in particular. And so I'm going to share a car example. If you aren't familiar with these, I would highly suggest digging into this after the conference. But what this model does is it maps a set of different features based on their characteristics to create satisfaction in our customers' minds. And so when you look at some of these car features on the right, you can see that some of these things like car emissions are not all that desirable. At the very top, I've got things like maybe park assist or GPS, or zero emissions from electric cars. Those tend to be more delighters. And so this is a way of taking features that would normally go in a product and mapping them out into delighter features, performance features, must-have features. There's certainly features that have no impact, but of course, we don't want those. We want to ignore those ones. So typically, there's a pyramid of these 3 features that we have to balance. I call it the feature cocktail. Now, we would love to have only delighter features, but the challenge, of course, is that delighters require innovation. They're harder to build. And then the must-haves have really undifferentiated. They're undifferentiated, have no differentiation, but they're the easier stuff. And so we have to balance this in the right way to get our customers' attention. Now, the good news is that if you have done the problem discovery work from earlier, you already have the insights. So if we looked at what we were studying in those interviews, we were studying hiring criteria, so which products were getting chosen and why. We were studying trade-offs, which products get chosen, but what was missing in them. And those all came from the chosen solution. We were also studying what products were considered and fired, not picked, and why. So those were the firing criteria from that consideration set. The good news is that this maps quite nicely with the Kano model. From the consideration set, the products that weren't picked, we can understand what the must-have features might be. And from the chosen solution, we look for performance features, those features that will create a linear response, so more being better. And then we also find through the trade-offs that our customers are going through, what might be some delighter features that we build. a nice way to internalize this is think of a job interview. If you could go and ask the hiring managers and the candidates, the ones that get selected, the candidates that get selected, what were the unique value propositions of those candidates? The candidates that didn't get selected, why didn't they get picked? That gives you a lot of ammunition to do a killer interview. And that's essentially what this is. Only we're doing this with our products. We want our products to get picked. And so we are doing this research to understand how we might position our products. Now, desirability is what this circle is that I just talked about, but it isn't the only concern. We, of course, have to be able to build these things. And so these three circles come from design thinking. Some of you may have seen this image before. I like to think of the MVP not just around the context of viability, but really desirability and feasibility as well, which is what this slide is trying to communicate. So when we are building our product, we have to make sure that we are coming up with something that's going to be desirable, but also something that's going to be viable, make our key metric, North Star metric work, whether that's revenue or engagement, and also feasible, something we can build in a reasonable time frame. And so these are other trade-offs that we have to balance when we are trying to figure out what is that right MVP or MVF that we are going to be building next. And then finally, we package all this up. So this is where we get to the third step in the process. What we do after solution design is identify what solution might cause a switch. Here we start to package it up into a story that we can now tell people. And ideally, we want to assemble this into an offer. And you will see something here that I call a mafia offer. If you watch the movie The Godfather, you will get the reference. When we build offers that are very compelling because they nail our customers' problems, they get their attention. And when we can provide a demo that just fits what I call problem solution fit, it becomes an offer they cannot refuse. And so that's where you see the mafia offer reference here. So the third step in the process, after we have defined or refined our solution, is to assemble this offer. Now, I want to highlight that this is not a build step. What we are really doing here is using a demo process. So we are crafting a value proposition. We are going to our customers and just walking them through a set of steps or a demo of what we are going to do. And we're not trying to train them on how to use our products. We are trying to show them how we can get the job done better than the status quo, than their existing alternatives. And this, I find, is the best way of agitating or breaking something that's already crippling in the customer's mind, their old way, and shifting them towards this mindset of switching towards, ideally, your customer. The mafia offer is where the rubber hits the road. So we are, again, not doing this with just one or two customers. We are going out there and running these tests with enough people to where we can convince ourselves that our product is going to be compelling. And ideally, you don't want to end with just some verbal pats on the back. You want to get some tangible commitments. So this could be, if you are a startup, getting actual paid commitments. If you are building a product or a feature in a product, this could be getting people on some kind of a short list or an early access list. But some kind of a tangible commitment is important here because it's too easy for people to say yes. And when the time comes, they just ghost you. They just disappear. So this is where the rubber hits the road. And the mindset to internalize here is one of demo, sell, build. So the traditional way that we build products is we build something first, then we go and show it to our customers in the hopes of selling it. And what you're seeing here is a slight switching of steps. But these slight switching creates some increase in speeds, but it also prioritizes some of those market risks that I talked about early on. So demo, sell, build versus build, demo, sell. So let me wrap things up. So we have talked about some of this new ways of thinking. And the last bit here that I want to highlight is that mindset change is important. If you are with me, that we are living in a new time for products in general, but mindset change requires some habit changes. A lot of these mental models and principles that I shared with you seem very commonsensical. We kind of look at them and we nod our heads. But what I want to highlight here is that putting them to practice is the harder part. It is the higher order bit. If you don't put them to practice, these stuff just get glossed over. So I've summarized some of the takeaway here. You can look at them. We'll make sure you get slides as well if you're interested in looking at the slides again. But these are some of the key takeaways from the talk today. And the last bit here that I want to highlight is that with anything new, we stay stuck in the comfort zone. And when we look at this comfort zone map, the step between comfort and learning has to go through a fear zone. And so as you begin to put some of these principles to practice, as you get outside and try to practice discovery before validation, or try to sell before you build, fear is just naturally going to creep into our consciousness. But what you see here is that once you can pass that fear zone and move into the learning zone and acquire some of these new skills, it actually becomes quite addictive, and there's no going back. And at that point is where we start to see true growth and true transformation in the kinds of products that we are building. So this is the last slide that I'll share. What you see here is the product development roadmap lifecycle that I shared before, and where these 3 steps that I talked about fits. It is very much front-loading some of the riskier assumptions that go into product right in the earlier stages. And while it seems like a lot more steps than you are currently doing today, from my experience, I find that this is worth the time. The time that we spend to understand our customers' unmet needs and wants, to actually understand how to build and design refined products that are going to cause a switch, ensures that when we do build our products, when we do invest the weeks or months in building it, that there is already a pipeline of ready customers eager for our products. So we go from hoping that they will use our products to knowing that they will, because we front load a lot of these risks. Thank you very much.
Like the microphone? Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Ash. That was awesome. We have a microphone here in the room, and I'd like to open a few questions to the people in this audience, because that has the advantage that Ash actually also sees that somebody is here, because he only sees the team's counterpart, right? That's the guys up there. So who has a question for Ash Maurya? Here is somebody already in the first row. Ah, Thomas. Look at that. You can catch that? We can try.
Oh, yes. Hello. Thanks for the talk, Ash. You mentioned in the beginning that there's, in rare cases, or in no cases actually, a solution which didn't have a problem before, right?
Well,
yes. And I was actually thinking about some cases, but these are rare cases. I would say special cases, like for example, space travel. Mm-hmm. How could you do a first moonshot like before? There was no man on the moon, or I don't know, fiddling around with DNA the first time when people invented that. But I would say these are like breakthrough innovations where mankind never did this before, but these are like rare examples, right?
Okay, let's see what he means to that, or what he says.
Yeah. So the first thing to kind of notice in both the examples you gave is they were technology or solutions, and what we want or have to do in this to be able to apply this innovator gift or jobs to be done is move to a bigger context. So think about the use case or the job to be done that the solution represents. So if we look at space travel, for instance, and so we'll just look at some quick examples. So space travel is, again, technology. And why do we space travel? If we kind of extrapolate this higher, it's for exploration. It's for going to places we have never been before. I think the Star Trek was to go where no one has gone before, right? And we have been doing this for centuries. I mean, as a civilization, we have been explored this planet, and that was exploration. And then if we look at space travel in particular, let's just take the moon. For a while, we have been enamored by it. People would look up at the sky. So the old way, before we had even telescopes, was let's look at the moon and try to study it. Then we got better ways of looking at it. That was the telescope. Then NASA and others, the Russians were trying to land on the moon to go discover it. And now we are looking even further. So when we look at it this way, hopefully I can convince you that you have to get outside the solution and look at the use case in this case, or the job to be done. The invention is a technology, but the innovation is applying that technology for an old job that was always there, in this case, exploration. If we look at the DNA fiddling, again, why are we fiddling with DNA? It could be to do breakthroughs in in medicine. And this is, again, where we have to get specific. So if we are trying to understand DNA because there's a genetic disease, the old way would have been all the research and all the other maybe drugs or other kinds of things we have done to try to fix those conditions. The new way would be genetic manipulation. And if again, so that's again where as a technology, I can't address that one as clearly because we need to ask what it's for. Why are we tinkering with the DNA? And what did we do before we could tinker with the DNA? And that's how you might start identifying the old ways and the new ways.
Thank you. Another question, and I can really throw far, actually. Here, maybe in the fourth row. Oh, that's too far.
Thank you. Okay, this is weird. It's a cube ash. I don't know if you've seen that. Hi. Thank you so much for everything you've shared. My question relates to the context you've set. Everything happens faster, faster, faster. How do we balance speed with making sure that what we do does not have negative consequences? Like, how can we still do ethical technology nowadays? Thank you.
Sure. So that's a great question. And yeah, so speed for speed's sake is not the answer. And so even though I'm kind of giving the impression that you have to be the fastest one there, I think it is more important to align yourself in partnership with helping your customers get a better job done. So this is where values and ethics and values like even sustainability, environment, all of those come in. And increasingly, there are these triggers where our customers want those as well. So I think that the more important thing I want to highlight here is speed to trust. If you can build something that your customers start to get value from, they start to trust you. And where the continuous part comes in here is that if you can continually partner up with your customers and continue to build better products and that align with both your and their values, then you build this partnership and it goes on. So we always see this happen. Even though I kind of talk about switching is happening, the barriers to switching are lower, we also know that incumbents are harder to switch away from. So when we look at any product, if you build the exact same thing as an incumbent, typically people know the incumbent. This is where habits and inertia sets in. And so that is what you need to do as well. If you are building something and you can get out the gate and start to build a customer base, you have an advantage over your competitors that don't yet have those customers. But as I was saying early on, it's easy to lose, but you don't have to go lightning fast and throw a bunch of stuff out and try to compromise on values. So I think there's a balancing here where you can go faster than before, but you can still be true to vision, mission, all of those types of things.
All right, I think we can do a third one. That was the maximum range I could do, but I switched to another solution. I'll just send Magnus up there in the middle. Yeah.
There's iteration happening right there.
Thank you. Thank you, Ash, for your presentation. I have one remark / question regarding causing a switch. So I really love this concept of a switch being a motivation or a cause for a switch, a motivation to change to a new, better solution. I just want to validate with you one more time. I mean, it's a great concept to stick to while thinking about a solution, but it still remains somehow a hypothesis, right? So I have a hypothesis about what could cause a switch, and like final validation will only happen once I've built a solution and see people really switching because of my earlier assumption.
I got the question. So it is a systematic de-risking process. So if you look at the 3 steps, when we even go and do problem discovery, the first thing, of course, is getting the insight. So why are people motivated to kind of go down this path? Where are they struggling? We can see their energy level. We can see their struggle. We can try to quantify their pain or motivation for change. So it's still a hypothesis. So we take those insights, we turn them to hypotheses. But what I would say is that before even building the solution, this is where the demo comes in. is that yes, a demo is not something you give to your customers where they can test it and get value. So there's still a leap of faith there. But many times I also see that people miss that step. So they might go from an insight to a hypothesis, build a product, and then not still get any traction. So the demo step is there to go back to your customers and say, those struggles or those problems you had, here is a better way of doing this. Do you agree? And where the rubber hits the road is getting them to not just tell you, oh, this sounds promising, but really get them to pay or commit. So that's that tangible commitment part. So yes, it doesn't still guarantee that you can build a solution that will deliver the value, but at least from a customer perspective, they have told you, if you can build this, I am here. I am here to use the product. And that is the second step in de-risking, which can reduce some of the risk of now building something, still a hypothesis, but now building something that will not work. So hopefully that addresses that question. So it is a systematic de-risking, and each of the steps is getting you closer to building something that ideally causes that switch.
All right. Thank you very much. One last remark. Yeah? So I really think he done it again, right? Because jobs to be done, he just explained it again from his perspective, out of a practitioner's view, like how he applies that, right? And that makes it so easy, usable, adaptable, and that's really wonderful. Thank you very much, Ash.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone.